Get ready to enter a brave new world with your host, Vasant Dar.
Brave New World is supported by the Center for Data Science, or CDS, at NYU. If your organization is interested in engaging with CDS through student projects, please email cdsindustry@nyu.edu. For more color on the podcast and additional commentary, please subscribe to my newsletter at vasantdar.substack.com. Hello, and welcome to Brave New World. My guest today is Chandrika Tandon, after whom NYU's Tandon School of Engineering is named. I've known Chandrika as an ex-McKinsey business consulting powerhouse who had a reputation for transforming businesses, and subsequently as an NYU board member. What I didn't realize was that she's really a professional musician, and that the other activities such as business consulting and philanthropy fuel her real passion for her true love, music. Chandrika, welcome to Brave New World. I am delighted to have you on the show.
My goodness, I'm delighted to be here. And it's really wonderful to see some of the great people you're interviewing as part of this. So I feel very honored to be in this lineup with you.
Thank you for that. Really appreciate that. I think of you as being a business powerhouse and a philanthrope with your name on NYU's Tandon School of Engineering, but I didn't realize until now that you have a new music album out. So how about that? Tell us about it.
Well, as I've said before, being music is what I am and everything else is what I do. And what I mean by that is music allowed me, going back to music in a very profound way, allowed me to connect with a deep part of myself. You might not know, but I've actually released 4 albums in the last 15 years, and one of them was nominated for a Grammy. So I want to say it's kind of a wonderful surprise that it was nominated. And now this album is called Amu's Treasures. And it was inspired by singing to my grandchildren, because I have 3 of them, and 2 of them are old enough to have listened to my songs. They're 5 and 3. And I've basically transferred my love for them through music. And, what happened is that I started out with just doing a few of the typical chants as a good Indian grandmother, trying to teach them prayers or some of the Vedic chants. But then this boy, especially the older one, wanted more, and he wanted more. And he'd say, I want more songs. And Amu is a term which means happiness and purity. It's a delicious term of endearment. And my grandsons call me Amu. And so this is why the album's called Amu's Treasures. And Vasant, once I exhausted these chants I was going to teach them, then he asked for more songs. So I dug into songs from my childhood. And our childhood, and then you probably relate to this as well, which is we didn't just sit down listening only to Sanskrit chants. I studied French. I knew French songs. I knew Greek songs. I knew English songs. We listened to Radio Ceylon, and we heard Baila songs. So my repertoire is very, very, very vast over the last many years. So I started making notes in my iPhone every night, because this boy would say, Amu, now I want some old songs, and now I want some new songs. So I had to dig into my memory to find new songs each night that I had to sing to him.
Good stuff. I mean, I actually did know that you had some albums prior to this, and I have listened to some of your music. Great stuff. And I really look forward to listening to this new album. And just for the listeners, we will attach a clip from the album to the end of our conversation. So stay tuned for that. And we'll also link your album to the show notes of this podcast episode on bravenewpodcast.com.
Oh, that's wonderful. The only thing I want to say, Vasant, is that about 13 or 14 maestros in the world of music, from Bela Fleck on the banjo to Kenny Warner on the piano, one of the greatest jazz pianists ever, Romero Lubamba, one of the greatest jazz guitarists ever, they've all come together to play on this album with me.
Awesome. So that is amazing.
That was amazing. So this wasn't a children's, that we weren't dumbing anything down. So this is really the finest of artistry with the best of the masters that they chose to share with people of all ages. And that's really what Amu's Treasures is all about. And we have 35 videos and 36 videos really to share as part of this whole journey of Amu.
Wonderful, wonderful. So before we begin, also congratulations on your Ellis Island Award. We were chatting just before we got started, and coincidence, I had Rick Smolan, the professional photographer, and it turns out that you guys were co-winners of this award.
Yes, and in fact, because his initial starts with an S and mine starts with a T, we actually were sitting next to each other as we were waiting to receive the award and had a very, very interesting conversation. I mean, Rick has a way of opening the world to so many with his incredible photography and his incredible adventures in photography.
Yeah, indeed.
100 days or 1,000 days or whatever he does. It's pretty brilliant. And I've seen some of his books and I can't stop looking at those pictures.
I know. There's something about it, right? There's something special in the way he captures the moment.
You want to go deep into where that event is happening, whether it's a herd of deer or whether it's, Alice Springs in Australia. He's an incredible guy.
Yeah. Very, very special. I really, and I was just telling you earlier that was my longest conversation, because it just flowed and I just had a lot of fun. So Chandrika, tell us about the major influences in your life and what led to this incredible gift to NYU.
I was born in Chennai, typical, simple, pedigreed middle-class upbringing, I would say, where I was the oldest daughter. And the expectation, my earliest memories are of my mother, shopping for my trousseau from the age of 2 because, I was a girl. And, you know how it is when you have a girl in a simple family in India because you have to build a trousseau. So she would be buying stainless steel and silver vessels for my trousseau because there was a clear plan to get me married. Now, of course, I decided to have other plans. I wanted to go to a boys' college, which was unheard of. So I went on a hunger strike to go to a college, to Madras Christian College. And then I went on a second hunger strike. By then I was a pro at hunger strikes to go to business school, which was away from home. And so I kind of broke barriers, I would say, and certainly got out from under the sort of the path that was laid out for me, which is, do a literature degree, or perhaps, and then be married, engaged by 17 and married by 18 and uphold the family honor. So I just sort of didn't do any of that.
I wouldn't have guessed that. I would not have guessed that you were sort of from a traditional, sort of conservative kind of a household, which is how you're describing it.
Yes.
I would have guessed that there was something else going on at home.
No, and it was a very traditional household, and it was a very simple household because we lived in Chennai, and Chennai now is the sort of the heart blood of a lot of the Indian tech industry and so on. At that time, and I'm talking 60 years ago, 65 years ago, it was a simple city and the bastion of South Indian culture in a way. And we certainly were a Brahmin family with all of its strictures and regimens and rituals. And I was the oldest daughter we lived with our grandparents.
So how many siblings did you have?
I have a sister and then a brother who came much later. So we had a sister who was a year apart. But as you know, the burden's always placed on the first one, which is, I was always told, if you do the right thing, then you'll set a good example. And it was an expectation that I would be married. In fact, we had a reunion of my high school, my whole K through 12 or wherever I went, and many of my classmates were remembering that my mother would say to them, I'm going to invite you for Chandrika's wedding, which is going to happen 2 years from now, boy indeterminate, date indeterminate, but it's going to happen by the time she's 18. For not child marriage, but when I got of marriageable age, let's put it that way. So that was the expectation. And that's what girls meant in families then. Yeah. It wasn't like, I have a girl, let her go out and work. It wasn't. let her go out and do all these things. And so it was a struggle to break the boundaries. And so that started my journey, where I went to Ahmedabad, went to work for Citibank, went to Beirut in the middle of the Civil War in 1975. Well, I was one of the last flights to leave Beirut. It was truly the middle of the worst civil war.
I've heard Beirut was pretty amazing.
Beirut's an incredible town, incredible. Lebanon's an incredible country. But it was the worst civil war. 1975 was, we were in the Holiday Inn, which was razed to the ground a few months later. And in fact, I was working for Citibank there, and we would, you would drive by the streets by day and come back in the evening and see buildings burning on either side. So we were right in the middle, and then they took us out of there. But I remember my flight when I left, maybe it was June or July, was one of the last flights to ever leave Beirut. They shut the airport down after that.
Wow.
So we would have sniper fire. And I've got to tell you a story about Beirut. There was a movie called Lust for Life. It's about Vincent van Gogh. It's a beautiful movie. Now, a friend of mine and I wanted to see this movie. So we said, let's go and see this movie because, we were working for Citibank. It was a Saturday or something. We went into the theater that night and the guy said to us, you can see the movie, but it's the only two that want to see the movie are the two of you. It's 400 Lebanese pounds. I mean, I had about 10 Lebanese pounds. We couldn't afford to see the movie because I said, why 400? He said, because you're the only two that want to see it. Now, we left. That evening, the whole theater was razed to the ground.
Wow.
So Beirut was all about near misses. But it was also the first time I left India, and I was all of 20 years old. So this was an adventure, a personal adventure, an emotional adventure, a professional adventure in every which way.
So what influenced you growing up? And I ask this because, yours was not typical household, both you and your younger sister, CEO of Pepsi, and you've been tremendously successful. Like, what was going on at home? Like, what were you guys talking about over dinner? Like,
we had a grandfather. For me, my whole life revolved around my grandfather, who was a retired judge. And he was quite old, but he was a much older man. So he died when he was 92. So he was in his 80s when I was very young. So every single night, I read all 37 plays of Shakespeare with him. I still have memorized probably 200 big poems. And I'm talking of poems like Elegy Written in a Country Churchyard, which has got multiple verses, or a Psalm of Life, Tell me not in mournful numbers, life is but an empty dream, so big poems. That's what I did. That's what I did most evenings. What the world of books and poetry did for me showed me a world which I didn't know existed, but was really building in my mind. So that was my life. So in a way, I was never going to be bound. Even though we had such a restricted upbringing. We weren't allowed to go past the 3 streets around my house. We didn't have play dates. I mean, people would come to our house, but we weren't allowed to go away on trips or anything. This wasn't how we grew up. We were very, very contained. But yet my world was vast. My windows were so big. And it's funny, years later, this is maybe 20 years ago, I went to Cornwall and Devon and the Cornish coast, and all of that. And it's funny, I knew so much about it because I'd read Thackeray, because I'd read the history of Pendennis. And, everything felt so real to me because I had read so much. So my world was books. We had a few books. There was a lending library. There was a British Council library. I would read probably 7-8 books on a weekend.
It's interesting you say this. It reminds me of a book by my friend Amitav Ghosh called The Shadow Lines. And in that, he talks about becoming aware of the world gradually as he grew up. And that's why it's called The Shadow Lines. He talks about going to London for the first time and almost knowing the distance between places, because he'd read about it and memorized it and seen the maps, so there was this sort of real depth that existed sort of vicariously, without,
exactly.
Yeah.
And it's sort of a deep knowing, because it wasn't like we had a billion books. You had a few hundred or a few thousand books, which you read again and again.
Yeah. Yeah.
School for Scandal. I mean, I must have read it 20 times, because you didn't have, miles of library. You just had a few and you read it again. Enid Blyton, whether it was growing up with children's books. And so, but it's funny, there were certain things I would dream about when I was little, and I'm vegetarian, of course, and there would be things like tongue sandwiches. Much later, I started to say, tongue sandwiches, goodness gracious, I wouldn't be caught dead eating it. But, you have these romanticized views of picnics and places and what you would eat and treacle pudding, and goodness gracious, my world was so vast. And by the way, it wasn't just England. England was a big part of it, because of a lot of our books and a lot of our authors, Thackeray, Sheridan, I mean, all of that, and all the poetry was Old English, But then there was so much else, that I was exposed to because of my grandfather.
So where did music come into the picture? Were you trained
Music was
classically?
all around me. My mother, there were 2 radio stations in Chennai, and music would start from 5 or 4:30 in the morning with M.S. Subbulakshmi's Venkatesha Suprapadam would start. And the 2 radio stations would never stop in our house. And I really have to give my mother huge amounts of credit. It didn't matter what was playing. We weren't required to sit and listen. It just was around you. So, randomly, I know so much of all sorts of, whether it was film songs or classical music, or it was sort of genre defining. It wasn't like, oh, you need to listen to X or Y. We just listened to whatever was on the radio. And then I had classes for a couple of years with teachers. But, it was always a conflict for me in my life between doing music and doing studies and academics. And it was just very hard to be doing both in any intense way. And I loved academics. I loved being in school. I loved being in college. So to me, the professional pursuit of classes in music was quite limited in that phase of my life. Though I'd participate in all the competitions, and I'd win a lot of competitions. I would sing at college. I would do radio shows in college. So I would do a lot of that. I mean, any chance I could get, I'd play guitar, so I'd sing with everyone. But it wasn't traditional Carnatic music. I learned that for about 2-3 years when I was younger, and then stopped, and then just went fully into my work life.
And were you influenced by sort of the new kind of rock and roll that was emerging?
Oh, we used to have this program again. We didn't own a record player. So we heard whatever was on radio. So, which was Binaka Geetmala.
That's right. I remember that.
There was all these Vivid Bharati. So there were all these channels. Doordarshan didn't exist at that time.
That's right. Yeah.
So every Saturday from 9:30 to 11 was a program called Listener's Choice, which would play a selection of songs. Cliff Richard, Dean Martin, The Seekers, You've Got It. I have a very good
Forces Request, right? Those are the 2 English.
And then there would be a Radio Ceylon kind of thing that would happen with Amin Sayani as the most incredible voice.
Right?
The Hindi songs, or there'd be other songs. So basically, because my recall, once I hear a tune once or twice, I pretty much can sing it. I knew every song that was ever played with all the words, and I would always sit with a piece of paper and write down the words just so I didn't forget the words. So I have incredible lyric sheets for all these songs, because sometimes if it was a popular song, 2 times in a row, the song would play over 2 weekends. I don't think in my growing up years, I don't think I've ever missed more than 1 or 2 episodes of Listener's Choice.
Yeah.
It was what we would wait for.
I know. I remember I'd wait for those. And, I remember being so sort of influenced by, the Beatles were probably the most influential.
But the Beatles came later.
Yeah.
So the Beatles, I knew every song. And in fact, when I came to New York, when I even went to Beirut for the first time, I had any money at all, which was like a few $100s. All I did in London, when I stopped in London on the way back, is buy so many vinyl albums That was the Beatles 62, 66, Beatles 68, 70. There was, Rubber Soul. I bought every one of the Beatles that I could find on the Charing Cross and in the HMV. There was the big HMV stores in London. So I just bought up the store, and there were so many other singers at that time. The Carpenters, they were all big at that time.
Yeah.
And then what I had at I Am Ahmedabad was, Roberta Flack, Quiet Fire. So I can give you the list of musicians at that time. I was insanely obsessed with music. In fact, my yearbook entry at I Am Ahmedabad said she killed us all softly with her song, because I would go to the music DJ studio at like 10 o'clock at night, and while everyone was studying, I would be listening to music, the same song on repeat until 3 a.m. and 4 a.m.
So did all the music performing contribute to your business presentation skills as well? I realize I'm asking the question somewhat strangely.
I know what you're saying. Later on, I would say what music did for me is allowed me to get in touch with a very deep part of myself. Because particularly the way I came back to music about 20 some years ago was a very important part of my own life journey, because music was my way of reconnecting with myself, because I really had to ask myself, what were the happiest moments of my life? If I really, truly had this understanding that there's one life to live, and what could I be doing? What would I be really happy doing? And I realized I had to have music as part of that. And I love to sing. I wasn't trying to get anywhere. I just wanted to sing. And in that process of singing, and in that process of finding my voice, I found myself. So I say this, and I don't mean this in an arrogant way at all. Music is what I am, and everything else is what I do. What I mean there is that music touches the deepest part of me. It makes the deepest part of me come alive. So from that perspective, I think in my later years, I'm much more authentic about what I say, what I think, what I express, because music has opened up a lot of layers. My whole life has been one of learning, whether it's from my mentors in McKinsey, or from I Am Ahmedabad, or from Madras Christian College, my professor, the head of the department, who kind of adopted me and talked to me about business and contract law and all of the issues there. And so my whole journey has been one of mentors. The whole journey has been one of learning from others.
So let's talk about your business world. Like you were talking about your first sort of assignment was in Beirut.
Right.
So talk about the trajectory that sort of led to the kind of success that you've seen in your career.
So I went to I Am Ahmedabad, which itself was an anomaly, because I was definitely one of the youngest in my class. Because most I Am Ahmedabad people came in there after a 5-year IIT.
Right.
And sometimes with work experience after IIT, whereas I went straight after a 3-year degree with no math. And I walked into I Am Ahmedabad. In fact, for my I Am Ahmedabad interview, it was a very intensive interview. You had the GMATs, and then you had multiple interview levels. And the final group, like whatever, few hundred.
Yeah, I remember those. I went through it myself.
You went through it yourself? Okay. So I was the last interview of the day, and there were 3 faculty members from I Am Ahmedabad who were in a panel interviewing me. So in my bio, I had written there that I used to perform French songs on radio. It's true. I mean, I had performed a lot on French radio, ORTF, and then in India, in Indian radio, because I studied French at the Alliance Française, and I was doing this. Now, after they grilled me for an hour on contract law and various other things, suddenly one of the professors turns to me and he says, I see you sing French songs. So why don't you sing us a song in French? And I'm thinking to myself, you kidding me? This is I Am Ahmedabad, the top business school, and you're asking me to sing in French. No, not only that, his Professor Call had spent years at the Sorbonne. So he was like an expert in French. It was almost like a test, Yeah. Am I like padding my resume, or am I for real that I actually could sing in French? Was my accent decent? I mean, I think he was looking for all that. Yeah. Fortunately, I'm a musician, so my accent's pretty good. So I sang a complete French song.
So what did you sing?
A cappella. I sang Tous les garçons et les filles de mon âge. Okay. So I sang it for them. Mm-hmm. And that was I think that's the reason I got into I Am Ahmedabad. I don't think it had anything to do with anything else, but I got in. So that was my journey into Ahmedabad. I had a great 2 years. I didn't spend much time studying. I found myself because that's the first time I was away from home. But then I did get into Citibank, which was a very tough interview to get into. And then they hired 3 of us. And I ended up going to Beirut. They sent you straight away to Beirut.
Yeah, that was a very coveted company to work
job.
for.
Yes.
Yeah.
And again, they took me through lots of rounds of interviews. And then I was with Citibank for 2 or 3 years and got hired by McKinsey, which again was a great story because I came here. I had PhD, including at NYU. I was accepted for a PhD in many schools. And that's what I wanted to do because I wanted to study more. But then I happened to run into one of the partners from McKinsey, and the rest is history. They literally flew me back down from India to New York. And I was probably the first one ever hired without an American or a Western degree into McKinsey. In a sari, I had 17 interviews in the worst blizzard of 1978.
So was that here in New York?
In New York. They flew me to New York.
Yeah.
And I interviewed with 17 people in a thin yellow silk sari. I was a size 0. I borrowed someone's size 12 coat. I swam in that coat. And I had slippers with no socks. And I interviewed with McKinsey, and then they gave me the job. And then they sponsored my visa and all of that. And then I became a partner at McKinsey and did a lot.
So let's talk about that, right? As just how the world has changed, right? Because you were the first Indian American partner at McKinsey,
a woman,
right?
For sure,
a woman
there were other
right?
men, but very few. Yeah. And very few women.
So what was it like at McKinsey at that time, and what's it like now, and how have things changed?
It's a really interesting question, and because I've had a bird's eye view at multiple levels. One is when I was there, and then funnily enough, my daughter ended up going there years later. In fact, she was the first baby to a partner, when I was at McKinsey. I was pregnant with her. And then years later, she went to McKinsey from Harvard. So this was like a whole cycle coming around. And I'm still involved with McKinsey because McKinsey, some of the partners are very involved at our school. And I still do lots of things with them. At that time, the whole firm was very small. We were 1,000 people. The whole firm was about 1,000 people. We were a few hundred partners. Everyone knew everyone else. There was a firm directory. We all knew everyone else. And I was a real newbie, a neophyte to America, to the culture, to everything. I didn't know what to wear. I didn't understand. Normally you have a ramp up. If you came to Stern or you came to NYU or came to an American school coming fresh off the boat, you have a ramp up period. You have a year or 2 years where you get to experience the American culture without any risk, because it's all your classmates, because there are many like you. You get to make your mistakes. I made all my mistakes in the public eye, in front of board members, my first assignment was an assignment for one of the largest snack food companies, where they were about to buy Nabisco, and they were about to buy a snack food company, and I was responsible for the whole assessment. I'd never driven. So I had to go to Parsippany, and I left at 4 a.m. thinking I might make my way there, but I didn't know how to drive, really. I didn't know how to make my way back. So I was finding out simple things about living on the job, while I was also competing in what they call the most brainiac firm. Everybody in my class was either a Baker Scholar from Harvard or Stanford, because he didn't even recruit at that time from most of the schools other than Harvard and Stanford. There were no Chicago people. I mean, it was that exclusive. So it's a miracle I was there. But I had a great time. I learned so much. I learned my partners were my teachers. The senior partners really mentored me. My clients were my teachers. So the lesson I learned is that you give it your 1,000,000%. And it comes back to you in spades when you least expect it. The whole cycle of karma is alive and well. In fact, my entire company was built because of some of the work I did at McKinsey much later. People just really teach you, In fact, I'll tell you, a client of mine, she's a woman in a bank in Boston that I was working with. She looked at my clothes one day and she said, I don't know, your clothes are awful. You really need to have a better dress sense. And yes, because I would buy the cheapest suits I could find. And very often I didn't know about the seasons. So I bought a brown suit, a thick brown woolen suit in the middle of a winter sale, which I had for the whole summer. So everyone was wearing these seersuckers and these off-white suits, and I was wearing this thick brown heavy wool suit by Evan Picone, only because it cost me $100.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what I didn't know. So I'd say, in a sense, that was my strength. I didn't walk in with any chip on my shoulder. I didn't think I was a woman. I didn't think I was not educated in America. I didn't think I didn't know how to dress. I didn't think I spoke funny, even though some of my clients would say to me, you speak too fast. What accent are you using? They would always ask me about the dots, because India was not...
Not in the consciousness. Yeah.
India was like this. Everybody would tell me about this one Indian cousin or one Indian client that had cheated them in banking or something. But I didn't look at any of that as a negative. I didn't even think of it as a negative. I thought of it is. So when somebody would talk to me about, whether the cattle on the streets in India and what we would consider microaggressions now, I would just think, okay, they can't talk to me about baseball or football. So they're talking to me about what they know. So let me educate them. So I would discuss cows on the streets, and I would discuss elephants, and somebody would say to me, what do you use to brush your teeth? Like I was a native. And I'd say, in the olden days, the villagers would use neem sticks, but I happen to use a toothbrush. So everything became a conversation, and some of those people are my best friends to this day. And we go back now 40, 50 years, some of them.
Yeah, it's interesting that you describe all of these things that you just sort of totally ignored, right?
Yes.
Because then they're sort of totally off the table.
I didn't walk into any meeting thinking I'm the only woman in the room.
Or I'm different or whatever.
I was always the only woman in the room.
Mm-hmm.
Always. In fact, when I worked in Brazil, for the first time, the CEO's office and my office were next to each other. All the secretaries on the floor brought a bouquet of roses, and everybody stood and clapped when I sat at my desk, because it's the first time that a woman had ever been on that floor and at an executive level. But, I never thought about it. And I basically said, thank you very much, and moved on. It was okay. Yeah. I didn't need to make a big deal of it, because I wasn't there as a woman.
Yeah.
I was there because I knew what I was doing. And if I didn't know it, I was going to figure out what it was. I was there as a professional, and I just stuck to what that role was at that moment in time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I didn't interpret body language. I didn't interpret sort of intention. So I assumed the best. When somebody would talk to me about the one default that some Indian in Hong Kong had done with their loan, which many CEOs did with me, or show me the one Indian painting they had, I would explain to them gently that, we did have almost 1 billion people. It wasn't quite 1 billion at that time.
Yeah.
And that, some people are connected, but that's probably not my relative or my friend.
Yeah.
But it could be, but I'm different. I don't cheat.
Yeah. And it's so different now, right?
It's so different now. And plus the net and social media and all that made the world much more accessible. At that time, nobody, somebody would talk about a trip they were going to make or hadn't made. India was exotic. They would always, there was all this red dot stuff going on. And an Indian woman was unheard of. I didn't have a peer group. I didn't have an international peer group, let alone an Indian peer group. There were hardly any women, American women, in the workplace. I mean, we had a handful. I knew every other woman partner. There was like 2 others at that time.
Yeah, yeah.
So it just is what it was. But it sounds ridiculous to say it now, particularly in today's context, when we're always looking at gender roles through such a microscope. I never thought of myself as a woman going into the boardroom or as a woman going into a consult. I was a McKinsey associate who happened to have done a lot of work on this topic, or I was a McKinsey partner, or I was the chair of Tandon Capital. Even though when I would walk in with a guy, the secretaries would say, oh, so-and-so has come in with his assistant. They would always assume I'm a secretary. And, I just put it down to ignorance in some sense, but not in a negative way.
Right,
I wouldn't want to say, how dare you do that? They just didn't know better because they were only used to seeing other secretaries.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, So
you kind of have to wait for the education process. But all of this, Vasant, is retrospective. At that time, this was never in my consciousness.
Yeah.
I never had a role. I never thought of myself as a poster child for brown women or poster child for Indian women or anything. I just wanted to be the best professional that I could ever be because, hiring McKinsey was expensive for any client. I wanted to have impact. So the mantra of my life was impact.
So what made you start your own thing? You left McKinsey and started your own business.
I had an idea. And my idea is that the whole financial industry was coming out from under deregulation, was coming out from under very, very stringent regulation and was going into, the Glass-Steagall was going into deregulation. And I had worked at a very in-depth level with a couple of different institutions, particularly in Brazil, where we took a bank, Banco Lá Brasileiro, which was bleeding, literally cruzadas, all the currency fluctuations, the structure was messed up. And I spent 11 months living in Brazil, restructuring this bank from bottom to top with the new CEO that had taken over. I didn't go home. I literally lived this institution, which was very different from the kind of work I had done until then, because until then I'd done a lot of strategy, a lot of global work, a lot of product market strategies, organizational development, culture development, all of that. But this was very bottoms up and bottoms down, very implementation focused and very total, very holistic. Because you had to think about the strategy and you had to figure out the operational processes. And that's what I wanted to do. And then I also saw that the value that you could generate at that time from the institution, from any institution, was mind-boggling. It was something like about 30 to 40% of the cost structure and probably about 20% on the revenue structure. Mm-hmm. So if you added the two together, you could essentially triple, quadruple the ongoing revenue stream, the ongoing EBITDA of the company. Mm-hmm. And this wasn't true of one institution. This was true of multiple institutions. So I felt I could create a standardized process that one could pretty much take to. It's like a toolbox. So I had this process mind that one could take in. And then you could apply the strategic framework for each institution, but the operational framework, everybody had a very similar human resources and a very similar loan processing and so on. So I wanted to make it much more of a standardized thing. And then I also thought I wanted to invest in these companies because I just thought the economic potential of this was staggering because with the regulation, they had gone so fat and happy. These institutions, the economic value was enormous. And really, that's what I did.
So I first heard about you when I was a young assistant professor at Stern, and I was trying to sell some of these banks on, doing AI and stuff. And that's when I heard that you were doing a major project with Chase.
Right.
So tell us about that, because I think that's an instance of what you're talking about.
Exactly.
And I suspect you learned from that and reused that.
Completely. But Chase, I was already an expert by then. when I came to Chase. I had already worked with multiple institutions. So Chase is a great example of how I got brought in, because I was at that moment an SEC disclosable event by the SEC. So people would call our office, because as the moment we were hired, the stock price would go up, because people knew when we went and we could change the economic structure dramatically. Chase, Michael Price, who died, had taken a stake in the company. Chase was this absolutely large, big, patrician, incredibly well, it's a bastion of traditional banking, right? And Michael Price had taken, I think, 7% of the company. A lot of the major investors who had made a lot of money off me, so to speak, in the institutions that I had worked with. Before that, I'd worked with 3 or 4 other institutions, and they'd been following me by then. I had a huge following. They had all taken stakes at Chase, and they had brought me in. They were trying to shake up this company. Now, it just happened, we had this incredible team of people at Chase. Now, we didn't finish the work at Chase because halfway through that, Chase got bought. They sold to, I guess, JP Morgan Chase, the 2 institutions came together. So that's what happened. And then we went on to do many more restructurings after that. So essentially, my strategy was you could go in, create economic value, and I wanted to only get paid based on the results. I did not want to get fees. So I either took phantom stock or I took equity stakes, not phantom equity stakes, or got a performance-based. And they did all the work. They did all the thinking, but I had a methodology, I had an approach. And so this is kind of what was interesting to me at that time. And then the disaggregation of the financial system that was going on. Glass-Steagall, the investment banks were breaking off, a lot of the back office processing was just splitting into different companies. So I was very interested in all of that because I understood it. I still understand it.
Yeah.
And that was very interesting to me to just imagine disaggregation and a reaggregation of this entire regulated sort of fat and happy industry into very nimble pieces, which were vertically integrated and were very, very efficient, which is a different model altogether.
Yeah. So, a slightly different subject I want to segue into. I'm a business school professor. A lot of my students want to go into consulting. A lot of them want to go into McKinsey. What sort of advice do you give people now? Like, how should they think about a career in consulting now?
Consulting does something for a young student who's coming out of business school that almost no other industry can do if you end up with the right set of assignments. The first thing you learn is that everyone's McKinsey or BCG or whatever is different because each one's firm is shaped by the set of assignments you have. And you could have any number of assignments. So the assignments depend on the partner and the team you work with. It depends on the industry you work with. It depends on the clients you work with. So all of those shape these unique experiences. But the good news is that they're all short. You don't very often, particularly as a young associate, you don't get put into one particular industry and one assignment for years and years. It's normally 3 months, 4 months, 6 months. So the kind of exposure and learning that a young person can get to different, extremely talented people with different skills and different experiences is like a wealth. So a 2 to 3 year stint, which is brutal. There's no question about that because there's travel involved. There's, your day starts at 5 p.m. because you're really trying to catch up. You're with a client the whole day and then you're trying to catch up so that you're ready for the client again the next day. So your lifestyle at my time was really tough, and it continues to be tough because there's always travel. You can't dictate where your clients are. You have to go to where your clients are. So you're getting on planes, you're getting on. But
so forget about having a life for a few years.
For a few years.
Yeah.
But for some, it's what they thrive on. I mean, I was there for 10 and a half, 11 years. I learned more. If I hadn't had this passion and an idea which was bigger than me at that time, I would never have left McKinsey. I would have stayed there forever. I loved the work. I loved influencing people and I loved making change. And I think so the learning, you learn communication, you learn how to influence people, you learn how to work collaboratively. So the skills that you learn are invaluable.
These skills that you're talking about, the ability to collaborate, to communicate, these are sort of probably the most important skills, right?
Completely.
In success.
And it doesn't matter what, and even if you're in a tough client situation or you're in a tough team situation, you learn a lot out of it.
Yeah.
Because you figure out, I've had a client who has walked in and has fired an associate on the spot. You learn about good behavior and bad behavior. You learn about what is the standard of professionalism. What does it mean? You learn about the skills of writing, the way McKinsey's thought process and the writing skills. It's not really about writing, business writing. It's about using the whole logic structure. We all lived and died by something called the pyramid principle. I still, to this day, when I write anything, or when I make any speech, or when I have any conversation, I'm always thinking about my governing thought and my 3 supporting points. And how is my pyramid built? I'm always creating inductive and deductive arguments in the way I think about any topic. I'm always thinking about a concept called oatmeal.
So it's like simplicity, right? Is what I'm seeing.
I would say it's like driving straight to the point. When you're getting paid hundreds of thousands of dollars by a client, it doesn't matter how young you are or how inexperienced you are expected to deliver value and expected to deliver extraordinary value. And so you better get yourself together quickly. So the fact that you can walk into an institution that you know nothing about.
I was going to ask you about this actually, and,
Right.
and I want to get in there before I forget it, right?
Yeah.
Because in consulting, you're often talking to people who know so much more about their business than you do. Right?
Yes.
So what's the advantage? I mean, you've got to sort of make them see things in a new way, right? Where value is
but what remember one thing, and this is true of academic institutions, and by the way, that's exactly transferred to all my work at NYU, as you do with consulting institutions. Fundamentally, institutions are full of pigeonholes and pockets. And so people have a very deep understanding of their narrow pigeonhole or pocket. There's very few people who have a full understanding in a relevant way of the whole company. You might know lots of things about the company, but for what is relevant, and to be able to put it in an industry context, or to be able to put it in a competitive context, or to be able to put it in a strategic context, not everybody has got that. In fact, the most brilliant CEOs, some of them do, and many of them don't. In fact, in every client I've worked with, there's always what I call these moments when there's a CEO sick to the stomach moment.
Yeah.
When the CEO is arguing with me endlessly saying, no, Chandrika, what you're saying is wrong. This is not how my company is. And sure enough, a month later, we would come out with a whole lot of things, which is exactly what they thought wasn't. And they'd say, oh, I didn't know this. I thought I'd gotten changed that 20 years ago. No, it doesn't. There's many a slip between the cup and the lip. It doesn't happen the way you think it does. So I
like that. There's many a slip between the cup and the lip.
It really,
I've heard that before. Yeah.
And I think that's what happens. And there are so many things. I mean, when we've gone in and uncovered stuff about a company, and there's something about the way the analytic techniques you learn as an associate, as a partner, as at McKinsey, and then and you develop that thinking over the years. You learn how to separate the wheat from the chaff. You learn how to ask the critical questions. There's 2 million pieces of information you can deal with, but you have to get to the important 10, the important 15, and then put it in a context. You have to set that in a jewel. And that's what I think a good consultant can bring to this.
And is there a process that sort of facilitates asking the right question?
Yes, there is.
Right?
There's a whole set of learning and training you go through for months and years, and you watch your other partners. That's what I said to you, at the beginning. Life is that of learning. If you open your eyes and open your heart and start to get out of the way yourself and your own ego and think about what you know and how smart you are, if you're really prepared to learn, there's so many people out there teaching you. And I will say to you that the learning I've had from some of my partners, not my peers, but my senior partners, was incredible. In fact, there's a concept I'll never forget. I had spent a month working on this particular idea, which I thought I was quite proud of myself about this work I'd done. And I went to the senior partner who was running American Express at that time. He went to run Amex later, Harvey Golub. So I went to him, showed him this document. I was really proud of that. He looked at all this for a few minutes and he said, oatmeal. That's the only word he said. He took it and he put it on the desk and he said oatmeal, and he didn't say anything more. I didn't understand what it meant. And then I summoned up the courage. He was a very, very big name at McKinsey. So I went to him later on and said, I'm sorry I didn't understand what you said by oatmeal. I mean, I know you weren't happy with what I did, but I just want to know what oatmeal meant. He said, if you write me something about a client, and any one of your sentences could apply to any institution, anywhere, anytime, that I call oatmeal. It's apple pie and motherhood. And I thought about it. I had done so much work and my ideas I synthesized and resynthesized it to such an abstract level that I lost the content of what it is I was trying to say. What I could have said simply, I had abstracted it into some intellectual framework that I was trying to get to. And that day onwards, I have never, ever done it in any other part of my life. I do this when I write notes to people. I do this. I simply try to get to the point. I don't abstract. Even though I have quite an analytic mind, I don't do that. And I thought that was a very profound thing to be able to say, that if you're going to talk about something, really say, you don't need 50 pages to get to your point. You can say it in 3 sentences but focus on the issue of the client. Even now, I use oatmeal at every possible opportunity. And I've taught us generations of people about that, from that idea about how do you get very content focused in a situation. And that forces you to understand the facts about the client. You can't just bullshit your way through. Sorry for the language.
Yeah, no, I'm
through anything.
You have another adopter of this term, and so yeah. I mean, I see exactly what you mean, and I was looking for a word for it, so thank you for that.
Right, and I'm telling you, it's my daughter now uses it endlessly in everything she does. But I do this at work. I've done this for years now. With generations of people.
And I like the expression because it's not like it doesn't make sense or anything. It's like what differentiates it.
Right. And if you can use that sentence for more than one institution at that time, it basically says you haven't done the work to connect your big idea with the small idea. So it really forces you to get into the content. And that's really changed my own way of working.
Yeah.
So, but that's just one of 1,000 examples I can give you of what I learned about professionalism, about serving the client, about putting them first. They were great examples. I mean, there's a reason why McKinsey is a great firm. There's a reason. It didn't get there overnight. It's because of hundreds of thousands of people who continue to do it day in and day out, do the right thing, and then train other people. And I certainly was a great beneficiary. I'm a great admirer of what I learned, the values of my firm.
Chandrika, how do you have the capacity to be productive enough to support your professional music career, business, and everything else, including the multiple boards that you serve on?
And that's true for you, isn't it, Vasant? I mean, you're a faculty member and you're doing podcasts. I mean, you're doing incredible research on very deep topics where you're exposing your thinking to brilliant peers in the world. And it's something about, doing multiple things actually, I think, changes the neuroplasticity of the brain. And I do have to say, my own journey in the past 20 years, as I told you, I went back to music. It's also taken me back into some very important practices for me, like meditation and breath work and pranayama, which has changed my capacity in very dramatic ways. I mean, in two ways. One is I've far greater clarity when I think about anything. I have far greater clarity of thought, of action, of of perspective about any situation. And I think the second thing that this has done, because of this clarity, it has also taken a lot of things. I'm more intentional about what is relevant and what is irrelevant. I never used to have that framework in assessing my day or my emotions even, because, you can spend half a day just being down about something and nothing gets done, or you're feeling lazy and then nothing gets done. Don't get me wrong. It's not that I don't have lazy days. I have plenty of them. But I'm very intentional about my lazy days now. I'm more aware that I've had a lazy day or two and I got it and now I need to move on. So I'm more clear about how I spend my time. Time is all we have. My runway is short. We don't know how long it's going to be. And it's all very well to kind of sleepwalk through life. And I don't want to do that. So I think has made this much. I have a very, we create business plans. You and I have done this for donkey's years. We've created business plans for everybody on the planet. But I think we kind of need a personal plan for ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so for me, it's very clear. I'm clear about what my mission is. I told you earlier on that I'm about impact. So I'm clear about the areas I want to have impact. So I've gotten much more focused about where I'll spend my time, my resources.
Yeah.
So NYU happens to be a big part.
So you've got a very effective ranking algorithm here.
Exactly. Well put. Yeah. As a great Stern professor, well put. Yes, I do. And I had to work at it much more, but now it's much more unconscious because it's gotten more embedded.
Yeah.
And then I reassess my priorities when I have a new granddaughter.
Yeah.
And then that time, I have to reassess it so I can get to spend more time with the grandchildren. That's an important part of my family, is an important part of my life.
Yeah. So, talk about impact, right? So here we are at the Tandon School. So tell us the sort of backstory here. Like, how did this happen, right? I mean, this is a major gift. What was your thinking, and why did you decide to support this initiative and put a substantial amount of your wealth into creating this engineering school at this institution, right? I mean, given the kinds of things you can do, how do you think about impact, and why did this figure somewhere at the top of your sort of lists of impacts?
Impact is one of the most important terms I've used as a sort of a North Star for myself, which is to say, whatever it is, you should try to have impact in a way. And that's why 20 some years ago, I got involved with NYU in the first place. I didn't go to NYU.
Right.
In fact, NYU was one of the schools that had given me a PhD scholarship. Stern had given it to me years ago. It wasn't Stern at that time, but the NYU School of Accounting, the Ross Institute of Accounting Research, Josh Ronan. But then I got when Tom Cooley was the dean, I got involved with the university, with the Stern School as a distinguished executive in residence, just to serve. All I wanted to do was work with the students, and I got to know all of you at that time, many, many faculty members. And of course, Tom Cooley. And I was with the students, I was teaching, I was lecturing many, many classes, co-taught with Sonia Marciano. I was doing many things, And then they invited me onto the board of NYU and then the board of Stern. And so that had continued on. And being on the board and the executive committee and chairing all of Global, and this is part of my McKinsey training. One of my mentors at McKinsey told me, whenever you get on a board, he said he used it, his mantra. He said he decided he wanted to get to know whatever the institution was, that he would spend a lot of time to get to know the institution. So I said to myself, well, I need to get to know NYU if I'm going to be on the board. So what I did as part of that is I went to every school that NYU had and spent 2 to 3 days at the school. I was already involved at Stern. I was already on the board of Wagner, and I decided to get to know the other schools. So I came to that time. We had nothing to do with Brooklyn Polytechnic. This was a separate institution, but I started to come to Brooklyn Polytechnic at that time. We were somewhat connected and started to see it. This was a completely different school than the rest of NYU. And then when at the executive committee, we started to have a discussion about investing and bringing the engineering school back in to NYU. I started to spend more time at the engineering school because of two reasons. One, engineering, the way we understand it, and both of us are from India, Vasant, and the smartest kids went to engineering school in India, the IITs, they were this. But engineering was this high-tech, very, sort of elitist discipline, right? But what I was seeing is that technology, it wasn't just engineering, it was technology, and that was permeating every part of business, of not just business, it's permeating humanities, it's permeating the arts, permeating music. So I just saw how ubiquitous it was. And this is going back not 2015, 2013. So this is going back 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And the second thing about this Brooklyn Polytechnic, which had just become NYU Brooklyn Polytechnic at that time, was the student body at this school was a completely different student body than the rest of NYU. Because most of them were first generation. Many of them, a big percentage of our school was Pell Grant eligible, which meant that the families were below the income. And many of them were first in their family to go to college.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't just that. When you looked at the numbers and you looked at the salaries of what happened to people when they graduated, right? The top three jobs, the top three salaries of kids that graduated anywhere were engineering and tech jobs, particularly from the school. So I started to think about the potential, Vasant, and said, if you're first in your family to go to college, and you can come out of that 4 years with one of the highest salaries, you're not just changing that person's life, you are changing the family, you're changing the generation below and the generation above. Because you always give back to your parents, your grandparents, and you change other people. And sure enough, and then I started to spend more time in the school. Just because, I got to know the dean and I got to know everybody and I was just here. Kids would tell me stories. And particularly once we gave the gift after that, the students would come to me and tell me, I'll give you a vignette. One of the kids said, Mrs. Tandon, my mother is a housekeeper and she works 3 jobs. My father's a bus driver on disability. My older brother has been into drugs and, has been out of the house. I go home every weekend. She's a first-year student at NYU Tandon. I go home every weekend because I'm determined that my younger brother is going to come to Tandon when he's in high school now, and I don't want him to go into bad ways, and I'm going to have him come to Tandon. And so I go and she'll come and say, I just want to thank you, and I want to tell you that I really feel like I belong here. That's why I'm involved with the school. Because for 5,200 students, give or take, we can change their lives a little bit, So to me, that's very tangible impact. So one of the first things we did when I got on the board and I became chair of the board is we really buttressed the whole placement side so that the kids had an incredible placement function that, that when you come from such a background of struggle and your parents have had to pay to get you here, we owe them, internships, we owe them paid jobs, we owe them ways that they can get out there and get themselves economically settled. So economic empowerment is a big part of it. Of course, we are giving them the educational empowerment. This is NYU. Mm-hmm. Of course, we're giving them that. But we also had to focus equally on that. So that's been a big part of my mission one of the many, many things that I care deeply about for the school. The impact has really been on me. I just feel it's a privilege. It's a gift, mm-hmm. that how, by the way, I felt that when I was at Stern. I mean, I had an office next to Tom Cooley, and I had an office there on the 7th floor, sitting next to, with Nobel Prize winners. There was Will Baumol, who was a couple of doors down from me. It's a privilege it's like to learn from amazing. I mean, I'm sitting with you today, and you're one of the greatest minds in the AI space and finance. I mean, in so many of the areas, in OR and a lot of these areas. So, how lucky can one be? And I think you asked me about capacity. This curiosity and this association with incredible people like you is what keeps me going. Each day I'm learning something. Today I was reading your article on AI, and I thought to myself, what a brilliant framework you've created. What a brilliant way that you have really started to characterize the stages of AI. In a very, going from machine learning to deep learning into the more generalized way that AI is pervading everything. So the multivariateness of AI in a sense and what that's doing to the world.
Well, I'm actually, thank you for those really kind words. And I'm actually amazed that you sort of summarized the article so well. So while we're talking about it, right? I mean, no conversation is complete, without talking about AI these days. What's your thinking about it? Are you surprised at what's happening with AI? I mean, is this something you had really thought much about? Because people ask me about this sort of as an insider, and I'm surprised, even though I've sort of seen from the inside, it's gradual progress. But, I sort of described 2023 as sort of the year which, where things went through, at least for the rest of the world, went through sort of this major discontinuity that suddenly it's in everyone's consciousness, and until November 2022, it wasn't, right? So we're seeing not even a year of this thing, which blows my mind, even as an insider. How do you think about it? Because you've been thinking about, you mentioned, you've been thinking about tech for a long time.
Right. And in a sense, I'm actually surprised it's taken us so long to get here. Because I'll never forget, this is when Lita, my daughter, I was pregnant with her. So this is 35 years ago. 35 years ago, I'll never forget, my client was Travelers Insurance Company. So I was sitting there with the PNC underwriting people, and I would look at the whole underwriting mechanisms that people would go through. This is insurance underwriting. And how did they assess risk for each? And I was appalled at how labor intensive each risk assessment was. And when you're writing a policy for $1,000, how labor intensive, I just couldn't see how the economics would work. However, the actuarial tables worked, and I understood that. So I would always think to myself, and I've actually kind of written papers on this in my own way because I love process, So I'd say to myself, could you not separate out, the 20 common things that occur and then take out what were the uncommon things and find different algorithms to write for the uncommon, which is kind of what AI does, right? Mm-hmm. It creates different methodologies to break down and create greater commonality and start to look for more factors that run in common. It's my simplified way. The same thing with medical diagnosis, because, once the web got in there, I don't know if you are like that, but when I get onto a subject, I devour that subject. I devour it like where I study. So if somebody has a disease, in about 3 days, I'm like an armchair expert on that disease because I am studying every written, starting from NIH reports to NSF, clinical trials, everything else. That's what I do. I'm curious. But then I've always been stunned that medicine hasn't used AI much more for diagnosis or for underwriting or for loan writing. I mean, there's so many simple functions that I've run into in my professional life that I have been stunned. So to me, while I'm very excited about the whole methodologies on machine learning and deep learning and what's happening, I think to me, the next era of AI, I'm not even going to call it artificial intelligence. I'm going to call it artificial wisdom, where we can start to bring in human thought and human ethics and wisdom, really, into analysis of algorithms, which is kind of an expansion of your fourth idea, really, which is when you're talking about this broad thing. And I just think that's the use cases of what we talk about. I mean, I was sitting with a whole team of people the other day that were talking to me about what is happening in the justice system, with using AI to look retrospectively at what's happened to cases and how judgments are made and how decisions are made. That's a small example of just going in and looking at decisions that have been made by particular judges, the biases, the unconscious biases that exist. If you look at the possibilities, I mean, we haven't, for example, scans, like just radiology scans. I mean, we haven't found ways to put data on accessible, readable places that one can apply algorithms to them. So while all the thinking is deepening on the algorithms themselves, I think there's a whole lot that needs to be done where data comes together with the algorithms. And as the data sets start to get more curated and cleaner and better, incredible things are going to happen. Because right now, the data sets, I think, are as much the barrier as the deep learning techniques are.
Indeed.
I think the deep learning techniques are way ahead of the data sets. So, and then wisdom has to come in on top of it. We have to figure out what problems we're trying to solve. Yeah, you can indiscriminately say, okay, it's ChatGPT for solving the freshman classes at Harvard. Yes. But I think there's more. I would love to see an intelligent thought process about what are the real problems we could try to solve using AI, or that'll inform policy, because it allows us to play with data sets which are vast, which have got huge policy implications and which have huge action implications for different people. Yesterday, I was having a meeting with several people from the urban side, from our school, and we were just talking about different ways data sets can be used for traffic patterns, test beds, congestion pricing. That's just one small area.
Yeah, it's interesting that you describe it as sort of collective wisdom, because that's, in a sense, we human beings are kind of, we learn and then we pass away, and a lot of knowledge is lost.
Yes.
Right? I mean, even though we accumulate knowledge via science and writings, there's a tremendous amount that's lost. Whereas machines don't have any of that problem.
They have
indefinite memory. They can remember forever. They can learn, and so I can see this as a huge kind of problem to be pursued, as this sort of pursuit of wisdom across different areas, and it might actually look very different in health than it does in policy or
and I think
social
this
media.
Gets into exactly, and you really alluded to that, and I'm just developing it more, which is it's the coming together of multiple. It's not just multidisciplinary; it is different perspectives that come together with an overlay of ethics, with an overlay. I just want to call it wisdom. I mean, at the end of the day, our brain and consciousness is able to do things because we have a whole overlay of wisdom. Consciously or unconsciously, we have that. And AI doesn't quite have that yet. It is raw.
Yeah.
And so somewhere, somehow, that overlay of wisdom has to be brought in, and how that'll come, I don't know. Because again, I want to go back to my term, pigeonholes and pockets.
Yeah.
There's a lot of that going on.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah.
And the people that have the data don't understand algorithms, and the people that understand algorithms aren't that interested in the data because they're going deeper into the algorithms. And I think, which is as it should be, because depth is important. But how do these things come together in a responsible way? I mean, there's various terms being bandied about, but everybody's on the AI bandwagon. But it's a little bit like this 6 Men of Hindustan, and the elephant.
Yeah.
So AI means different things to different people. So if someone says it's a tail, someone says it's a head, someone says it's a trunk,
Yeah.
So someone says a tusk. So I think that's what we now have to figure out. I'd rather see a few areas where there's a real quest for impact and problem solving, bringing all of the disciplines together for a wise artificial wisdom.
Yeah. No, I like that. And as a goal, that makes a lot of sense. So, Chandrika, you referred earlier to sort of, this, your sort of spiritual side and mindfulness. How important has that been to you personally when it comes to sort of your professional life, or are the two sort of separate? And where I'm getting at, so I guess more broadly, is like, what's your advice to students these days? And we talked about business people, but just in more generally, how should people be thinking about their future these days?
About 23 years ago, I was sort of looking at my life questions, sort of meta questions. I said, what makes me happy? Why was I put on this planet? Because I was just I really had to step back and think of what is success. What does success mean to me? And why did I come onto this planet? Is this it? I have a runway, whatever that number of years that is. And that's what got me into this deeper and deeper investigation of myself. Mindfulness, meditation, I would say, deep transcendental meditation, breath work, all became part of quieting my own chatter so I could assess myself and get much greater clarity about everything I was doing. Now, that state of mind is a very different state of mind than how I operated in my 20s or my 30s or my 40s. It's a very different state of mind. And now one might say, hey, some of it is age. Absolutely not. I know a lot of people who are my sort of age group, my sort of contemporaries, who are as stressed out and as confused and as sort of cluttered as I was in my earlier decades. So what this has done for me is just put everything in its place, and I'm able to look at it before my situations, whatever the situation was, whether it was a business situation, a personal situation, it was all either stressful, either highly joyous, highly down. I was up, down, sideways. I was, as one of the spiritual masters calls it, I was a football of everyone's opinions. I cared about what somebody thought. I cared about what my peers thought. Now I really don't. I focus very much on what I do well, and I'm very focused on impact, what I can do. And if I can't do it, I'm not trying to be a perfectionist. This was my badge of honor. I'm a perfectionist. I did this. I think I am perfection now. I am perfection. What I do now, I am perfection. I can't improve on what I'm doing. And what I'm doing now is exactly what I want to be doing. And my whole perspective of my business interactions has changed. It was very important for me to get my point across. It was very important for me to succeed, and whatever my definition at that moment was. Now it's not about that. I'm very focused on purity of purpose.
Well, Chandrika, I really want to thank you for this conversation. It's been a pleasure. I've really enjoyed it, and I'm so glad we got together and actually got to chat, one-on-one for a little more than an hour. It's been fun, and I hope we can do it again.
No, this is great. Thanks, Vasant. And this is such a great idea in terms of what you're doing. So
Thank you.
I think to kind of people have got so many different perspectives. So I'm sure you're a very good conversationalist.
Thanks.
You elicit a lot of different ideas from people.
Thank you. You're kind. And now for a short clip from your latest album.
There was a jolly miller once lived on the River Dee. He worked and sang from morn to night, no lark more blithe than he. And this the burden of his song forever used to be. I care for nobody, no not I, if nobody cares for me. I care for nobody, no not I, if nobody cares for me. The reason why he was so blithe, he once did thus unfold. The bread I eat, my hands have earned, I covet no man's gold. I do not fear next quarter day, in debt to none I be. I care for nobody, no not I, if nobody cares for me. I care for nobody, no not I, if nobody cares for me. A coin or two I've in my purse to help a needy friend. A little I can give the poor and still have some to spend. Though I may fail, yet I rejoice, and others could have to see. I care for nobody, no, not I, if nobody cares for me. I care for nobody, no, not I, if nobody cares for me. So let us his example take and be from malice free. Let everyone his neighbor serve as served he'd like to be, and merrily push the can about and drink and sing with glee. If we can spare a little dram, the world would better be. Let's smile and laugh at good and bad for hap and harmony. If nobody cares a doit for us, why not a doit care we?